Imagine you have lived your entire existence at the bottom of a tiny dark well.
Okay.
Your whole framework for reality is dictated by these damp, mossy stone walls curving closely around you. You are absolutely convinced that the shallow puddle of water at your feet and, that narrow little circular sliver of sky you can occasionally see way up above your head constitutes the entirety of the universe.
Right, because that is literally all you have ever experienced.
Exactly. It's everything that exists, everything that ever has existed, and everything that ever will exist. And then, one ordinary Tuesday, someone drops in from above.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and they bring tales of something called an ocean. They try to describe rolling, rhythmic waves, these endless blue horizons, and bodies of water so incomprehensibly massive that you couldn't swim across them in 100 lifetimes. The question is, would you believe them?
Probably not.
Or would you look down at your familiar little puddle, look back up at this stranger, and confidently declare them a liar?
I mean, the psychological friction in that scenario is just profound.
Yeah.
To accept the existence of the ocean, the inhabitant, first has to accept the total insignificance of the puddle they've spent their entire life defending.
Yeah.
It requires this massive epistemological collapse. You have to admit that your foundational understanding of reality wasn't just incomplete, but fundamentally flawed by its sheer narrowness.
That thought experiment right there is the conceptual anchor for our discussion today. But before we attempt to conceptualize that ocean, I want to offer a sincere, humble welcome to you, the listener, on behalf of the Simplified Semi YouTube channel.
Welcome.
Our mission with these deep dives is to distill incredibly dense, complex source material into something that is both accessible and rigorously analyzed. But parsing 19th century philosophical texts, cross-referencing them with modern psychological frameworks, and, building these comprehensive summaries takes a massive amount of time and dedicated effort.
It really does. It's a huge undertaking.
It is entirely community support that allows this to happen. So if you find value in this level of detailed exploration, we humbly ask that you subscribe to the channel and share this deep dive with someone who appreciates uncovering the layers of history and philosophy. It truly sustains the work we do.
Absolutely. The support of a curious community is what makes analyzing texts of this magnitude possible at all. And the subject matter we're tackling today is not merely historical trivia.
No, not at all.
It's a foundational text that attempted to permanently alter the global philosophical landscape. We are dealing with ideas that actively dismantle the boundaries between Eastern introspection and Western scientific materialism.
So we are welcoming you to a deep dive into the complete works of Swami Vivekananda, specifically focusing our lens on Volume 4. And let me tell you, this volume is an absolute treasure trove.
It really is.
It contains his foundational speeches, his incredibly articulate, systematic synthesis of Vedanta philosophy for a global audience, his powerful calls for structural social reform in India, and even his original poems and translations. They really capture the emotional weight of his intellect.
Yeah, they do.
Our objective today is to map out a historical and cultural tectonic shift. We're examining how a young, relatively unknown Indian monk in the late 19th century arrived in America and systematically dismantled the Western world's preconceptions of Eastern thought.
He essentially constructed a formidable logical bridge between ancient Indian spirituality and the emerging discoveries of modern Western science.
Okay, let's unpack this, because to understand the impact of his words, we first need to reconstruct the physical and cultural stage he was standing on.
The backdrop is just as important as the text itself here. Our sources chronicle his journey, starting with his historic paradigm-shifting address at the 1893 Parliament of Religions in Chicago.
Right.
And then they move through his deeply rigorous lectures on jnana yoga, which is the path of intellectual discernment and knowledge. We are going to explore a radically different perspective on the architecture of human nature, the concept of cosmic illusion, and the precise mechanics of an infinite universe.
But the starting line is September 1893. The city of Chicago.
Set the scene for us.
Okay, so the setting is the World's Columbian Exposition. This was a monumental World's Fair designed to celebrate the 400th anniversary of Christopher Columbus's arrival in the New World.
But practically speaking.
Practically, it was a massive showcase of American exceptionalism and the absolute triumphs of the Industrial Revolution. They built an entire temporary metropolis. They called it the White City.
Out of plaster of Paris, right?
Yeah, entirely out of plaster of Paris. It featured massive neoclassical architecture, the world's very first Ferris wheel, and these huge pavilions dedicated to the newest miracles of electricity and machinery.
And the atmosphere, as described in the historical context of the sources, was a sea of mind, young, tumultuous.
Tumultuous is the perfect word for it.
It was overflowing with a very specific brand of 19th century Western civic pride. The United States and the broader Western world was aggressively flexing its muscles. They were demonstrating their absolute mastery over the physical, material realm.
And in conjunction with this highly technological fair, they organized the world's parliament of religions. They brought together representatives of the world's major faiths.
Though we should note, the implicit and sometimes explicit Western expectation was that this parliament would serve as a platform to demonstrate the ultimate supremacy of Christianity over all other global traditions.
Exactly. And into this highly charged, deeply self-assured, almost arrogant environment steps Swami Vivekananda.
Just picture it.
He is wearing the ochre robes of a Hindu sannyasin, a wandering monk. He represents an ancient, calm ocean of Eastern spiritual development, which stands in stark contrast to the churning, mechanical ambition of the surrounding exposition.
The texts actually describe him as the literal point of confluence for two massive, historically isolated mind floods.
That's a great image.
You have the energetic, externally focused, world-conquering modern West colliding head-on with the deeply introspective, internally focused, world-renouncing ancient East.
And when he finally addresses the assembly of over 4,000 attendees on September 11, 1893, he doesn't deliver the standard, dry theological treatise that all the other delegates had been reading from.
No, he bypasses the formal, rigid protocols of the day entirely.
He steps to the podium and simply opens with the words, "Sisters and Brothers of America."
And the records show that this simple phrase triggered a standing ovation that lasted for 2 full minutes.
2 whole minutes of cheering just for the greeting.
The audience was intuitively reacting to the sheer authenticity of a universal greeting that stripped away all sectarian divisions before he even made his first philosophical point.
Once the applause finally subsided, he delivered a thesis that completely subverted the underlying premise of the parliament itself.
Because the standard progressive view among the liberal theologians of that era was the concept of religious tolerance.
Right, tolerance. But Vivekananda takes a scalpel to that idea. He argues that tolerance is fundamentally insufficient. And actually, it's subtly condescending.
It really is. Tolerance implies a dynamic of superiority. It's like saying, I possess the ultimate truth, and I believe you are fundamentally wrong, but I will magnanimously put up with your presence.
Exactly. So instead of tolerance, he preaches the doctrine of universal acceptance. And to cement this, he quotes the Bhagavad Gita to them. He recites the ancient Sanskrit and then translates it, saying, "Whosoever comes to me through whatsoever form I reach him. All men are struggling through paths which in the end lead to me."
What's fascinating here is the philosophical distinction he is making. It's a total structural overhaul of comparative religion.
How so?
Well, he is not standing on that stage arguing for the theological supremacy of Hinduism. He's not trying to win a debate over whether the Christian, Islamic, or Buddhist doctrines hold the singular monopoly on truth. He is proposing that the framework of a binary right or wrong religion is an illusion. He posits a developmental model of spirituality. As he famously states, man is not traveling from error to truth, but climbing up from truth to truth, from truth that is lower to truth that is higher.
So every religion is simply a different snapshot of the exact same infinite reality, just captured from different altitudes of human comprehension.
Precisely.
Which brings us back to that analogy of the frog in the well that we started with. Vivekananda deploys this story not just as a cute folktale, but as a precise epistemological critique of dogmatism. He addresses this massive audience of learned, highly credentialed, and in many cases fiercely sectarian religious leaders, and he tells them of a frog who lived its entire life in a well.
It grew sleek and fat, eating the worms in that specific water.
Right, and one day, a frog from the sea falls into the well. The well frog naturally asks the newcomer where he is from. When the sea frog answers, the sea, the well frog asks, "How big is that? Is it as big as my well?" And he takes a confident leap from one side of his puddle to the other.
And the sea frog's reaction is just to laugh at the absurdity of the comparison. He points out the impossibility of measuring an infinite ocean against a localized puddle.
But the well frog, who is completely unable to process a reality outside his immediate empirical experience, takes another leap and demands, "Is your sea this big?"
You just can't fathom it.
And when the sea frog insists that the comparison is nonsense, the well frog's worldview is directly threatened. He immediately resorts to denial and hostility. He declares, Nothing can be bigger than my well. This fellow is a liar, so turn him out.
And then Vivekananda pauses, looks at this assembly of the world's religious elite, and delivers the punchline.
That has been the difficulty all the while.
He outlines how the Hindu sits in his little well and thinks it is the whole world. The Christian sits in his well and thinks it is the whole world. The Mohammedan sits in his well, completely convinced there is nothing beyond it.
The rhetorical brilliance of deploying this specific analogy in that specific room is just incredible. He manages to perfectly diagnose the root pathology of sectarianism and religious violence without actually launching a direct attack on any single theology present.
He preempts their defensiveness by including himself in the critique.
Yeah.
He openly admits, I am a Hindu. I am sitting in my own little well.
It's a masterclass in disarming a potentially hostile audience.
It really is. He is suggesting that fanaticism, the same fanaticism he explicitly notes, has drenched the earth in human blood, destroyed civilizations, and sent whole nations into despair, is not necessarily born from inherent evil.
But from an epistemological blind spot.
Exactly. People are trapped in their respective conceptual wells. They are structurally incapable of conceiving the vast ocean of truth that exists outside their specific dogma.
So, having laid the groundwork of universal acceptance, he doesn't stop at redefining how religions view one another. He pivots and completely rebrands how humanity views itself.
This is a huge shift.
This is where Volume 4 of the Complete Works becomes incredibly provocative, particularly for a 19th century Western audience. You have to remember they were steeped in the Calvinist and broader Christian doctrines of original sin and inherent human depravity.
Right, the idea that we were all born broken.
Exactly. And he stands before them and flatly rejects the label of sinner. In fact, he takes the offensive. He declares that it is a sin and a standing libel on human nature to refer to human beings as sinners.
The theological shockwave of that statement cannot be overstated.
I can only imagine the gasps in the room.
The prevailing Western framework was largely predicated on the idea that humanity is inherently flawed, fallen from grace, and utterly dependent on external divine intervention for salvation.
And Vivekananda structurally inverses this model entirely.
He does. He quotes the ancient Vedic sages, addressing the audience not as fallen mortals, but as children of immortal bliss. He goes so far as to call them divinities on earth.
He is replacing the paradigm of inherent depravity with a paradigm of inherent divinity.
And the phrasing, children of immortal bliss, it's a beautiful rhetorical flourish, but looking closely at the text, it is supported by a remarkably rigorous philosophical architecture.
This isn't just a motivational speech.
Not at all. It is a distillation of Vedanta philosophy. He explains that according to the Vedas, the fundamental error of human perception is the identification with the physical form. We are not physical bodies that happen to possess a spirit.
We are eternal, unchangeable spirits that are temporarily utilizing physical bodies.
Yes, and he uses this mind-bending geometric analogy to explain the nature of this soul. He describes it as a circle whose circumference is nowhere, but whose center is located in the body.
A circle whose circumference is nowhere. That specific geometric metaphor is crucial for understanding the Vedantic concept of consciousness, isn't it?
It is. A circle with a circumference that is nowhere implies a state of being that is totally unbounded, infinite, and non-localized. It spans the entirety of existence.
But the center is located in the body.
Meaning that this infinite consciousness is currently experiencing reality through a highly specific, localized, and limited focal point, the human sensory apparatus.
So death, in this framework, is not the cessation of existence at all.
No, it's simply the shifting of this center of perception from one physical instrument to another. The soul itself remains untouched by matter. It is, in its very essence, free, unbound, holy, pure, and perfect.
Presenting the soul as inherently perfect and untouched naturally invites the most formidable logical challenge in the history of theology.
The problem of suffering.
Theodicy.
Exactly. If we are infinite, perfect beings, and if the universe is governed by a just and merciful reality, why is there such profound disparity and agony in the world?
It's the ultimate question.
Vivekananda addresses this head-on in his speeches. He poses the question, if a supposedly just and merciful God created souls out of nothing at the moment of birth, why are some individuals born into circumstances of immense happiness, health, and wealth, while others are born into abject misery or physical disability, dragging on a wretched existence from their very first breath? Why would a merciful creator be so demonstrably partial?
Right. And the traditional Western theological defense often relies on the promise of posthumous justice.
The idea that terrestrial suffering will be rewarded or balanced out in a future heavenly life.
But Vivekananda sharply points out the logical fallacy in this defense. Promising a future reward does not adequately explain or justify the necessity of present misery under the administration of a truly just and omnipotent creator. It merely defers the logical inconsistency.
To resolve this, Vedanta entirely removes the concept of an anthropomorphic creator, God making arbitrary moment-to-moment decisions about human fates.
He characterizes the idea of a creator consciously deciding to make one person happy and another miserable as a cruel fiat.
Instead, the texts introduce the law of karma. Now, karma is heavily misunderstood in popular culture as a system of cosmic punishment and reward.
Like a cosmic scoreboard.
Right. But Vivekananda explains it simply as the law of cause and effect operating on the moral and spiritual planes. Just as there is a parallel line of matter governed by physical heredity, explaining why a child looks like their parents, there is a parallel line of mind governed by the soul's own past actions.
And the mechanism of karma operates through what Vedanta calls samskaras, right?
Yes, samskaras, or subtle mental impressions and tendencies. If an individual is born with a specific natural aptitude, a deep-seated fear, or a unique physical and mental disposition that cannot be entirely accounted for by the immediate environment or physical genetics.
It must be the result of habits formed through repetition in past iterations of existence.
Precisely. The soul, carrying a highly specific bundle of these acquired tendencies, naturally gravitates toward and takes birth in a physical body and environment that serves as the fittest instrument for the manifestation of those specific tendencies.
The implication of this doctrine is a radical shift in accountability. It means that you, as the individual soul, are entirely the architect of your current condition.
There is no unjust God to blame for your misfortunes.
Nor is there a Satan to blame for your temptations. As he bluntly states in the text, we manufacture our own life all the time.
This is the ultimate form of accountability, but simultaneously it is the ultimate form of empowerment.
Because if you alone manufactured the current mess through your past actions, you alone possess the inherent power to dismantle it through your present actions.
He issues this roaring call to action. Come up, O lions, and shake off the delusion that you are sheep.
He is arguing that humanity is suffering from a form of mass self-hypnosis. We've convinced ourselves that we are weak, finite, mortal creatures subject to the merciless whims of a mechanical universe.
Broadening this concept, he is insisting on the supremacy of consciousness over matter. We are not the helpless servants of material forces. Matter is entirely subordinate to the soul.
The true self is unchangeable, pure, and perfect.
It only appears to be bound by the limitations of the physical world due to its own accumulated ignorance and its false identification with the body. The goal of human existence is to break this hypnotic spell and realize the true nature of the self.
Here's where it gets really interesting, diving into the deep end of the philosophical pool. We have established this premise. The soul is infinite, God is infinite, and the underlying reality is perfectly pure.
Yes.
But the immediate glaring contradiction is the physical world around us. How did the infinite, perfect, and unchangeable absolute become this finite, highly flawed, painfully chaotic universe?
How does perfection decay into imperfection?
Exactly. This question sits at the very core of Advaita Vedanta, the science of non-dualism, which Vivekananda explores meticulously in his Jnana Yoga lectures.
It is the ultimate puzzle of metaphysics. And the answer that Advaita Vedanta provides is profoundly counterintuitive to the Western mind.
It posits that the infinite never actually changed.
The absolute never became finite. The perfect never actually degraded into the imperfect.
But the immediate pushback from any rational listener is obvious. I'm sitting in a finite room. I inhabit a finite body that gets tired and sick. I perceive a world filled with distinct, separate objects and undeniable suffering. How can a philosophical system claim that none of this change actually occurred?
Advaita Vedanta addresses this through the concept of Maya. It's often inadequately translated as illusion, but it's more accurately described as a statement of fact regarding the paradoxical nature of apparent reality.
To explain how the unchangeable appears to change, the text relies on the doctrine of Vivartavada, or apparent manifestation.
This is crucially distinct from Parinamavada, which is the theory that the cause literally transforms into the effect, like milk turning into yogurt.
In Vivartavada, the underlying reality remains entirely unaltered, while the perception of the observer projects a false reality over it.
The classic Vedantic analogy is walking in the dark and seeing a rope on the ground, but mistaking it for a snake.
The snake causes real fear. Your heart rate spikes, you jump back. The physiological reaction is completely real.
But the moment you shine a light on it, you realize the snake never existed. It was always a rope.
The rope never transformed into a snake. The change was entirely a projection of your ignorant perception.
Vivekananda uses some incredibly evocative analogies in his lectures to make this abstract concept of Vardavada concrete for his audience.
One of the most prominent is the analogy of the screen and the movie projector.
He explains that the true self, the infinite consciousness, is like a pristine, unchangeable screen. The universe, with all its events, lifetimes, miseries, and joys, is simply the scenery of a film passing over that screen.
The screen itself never fundamentally changes. It never gets burned by the blazing fires depicted in the movie, nor does it get wet from the torrential rainstorms projected onto it.
He also uses the natural world to illustrate this. He compares the soul to the eternal vast blue sky.
Our human experiences, our miseries, our fleeting moments of happiness, our shifting moralities of good and evil, and our sequential lifetimes are merely clouds of various shades passing across that sky.
A dense, dark cloud may envelop you for a moment, completely veiling the true self and making it seem as though the sky has vanished. But the clouds eventually drift away because they are inherently temporary and changeable.
And throughout the entire storm, the sky itself remains exactly as it always was. Infinite, untouched, and serene.
The radical egalitarianism of this philosophy is really striking. He asserts that this latent perfection is not the exclusive property of saints or deities. It is fully present, completely intact, even in a microscopic amoeba.
From the single-celled organism all the way up to the most enlightened human being, the inner reality, that infinite screen, never changes its nature. The only thing that evolves is the covering.
The evolutionary process, in the Vedantic view, is not the soul growing or improving, but the gradual thinning of the veil of ignorance.
The amoeba is encased in a very thick, dense covering of matter and limited perception, allowing only a microscopic fraction of the infinite light to shine through.
Whereas the enlightened sage has refined their physical and mental instrument to such a degree that the covering is almost entirely transparent, allowing the full brilliance of the infinite consciousness to radiate outward.
But the intrinsic light within the amoeba and the sage is absolutely identical in quality and magnitude.
What makes Volume 4 so compelling is how Vivekananda aggressively cross-references this ancient millennia-old philosophy with the cutting-edge science of the late 19th century.
He was speaking during an era of massive breakthroughs in physics, particularly in the understanding of thermodynamics and electromagnetism.
And he repeatedly challenges his Western audiences to look at the trajectory of their own scientific discoveries. His foresight on the intersection of physics and metaphysics is remarkable.
He observed that modern science was rapidly dismantling the idea of distinct, isolated forces. Physics was moving toward the realization that all forms of cosmic energy, heat, light, electricity, magnetism are simply different manifestations of a single, unified underlying force.
The ultimate goal of theoretical physics is the grand unification theory, mathematically proving that all matter and energy constitute one continuous, undivided ocean of existence.
Vivekananda seizes upon this scientific momentum and declares that Vedanta achieved the spiritual equivalent of this unification centuries ago.
He argues that just as science is proving all material energy is one, Vedanta has proven that all individual souls are simply localized expressions of one infinite ocean of existence, knowledge, and bliss.
He writes, "The difference between a human, an angel, an animal, and a stone is merely in degree of manifestation, not in kind."
The foundational aphorism for this grand unification Vedanta is the Sanskrit phrase Tattvamasi, which translates to, "Thou art that."
It is a declaration of absolute identity. It means that at your deepest core, you are completely unified with the universal being.
You're not a fragile, isolated boat being violently tossed around in a tempest of mechanical cause and effect. You are the ocean itself.
The philosophical texts assert that the moment an individual truly realizes this non-dual reality, all psychological fear instantly evaporates.
The logic is impenetrable. If all of existence is one continuous consciousness, who is there to fear? You cannot fear yourself. You cannot fundamentally injure yourself. Fear is a byproduct of perceived separation.
While the intellectual architecture of Advaita Vedanta is breathtaking, the inevitable question for you, the listener, is one of practical application.
Yes, how do we live this?
It's one thing to sit in a quiet room, engage in deep philosophical reflection, and intellectually agree that you are the infinite blue sky. But tomorrow morning, the alarm will still go off.
You still have to navigate rush hour traffic.
Endure workplace politics, pay mortgages, and deal with physical illness. How does this lofty philosophy of non-dualism translate into the grinding mechanics of daily life?
Vivekananda addresses this directly through his teachings on the various yogas, specifically karma yoga, the yoga of action, and bhakti yoga, the yoga of devotion.
The translation of these highly abstract concepts into daily pragmatic action is perhaps Vivekananda's most vital contribution, heavily influenced by the life and teachings of his own master, the mystic Sri Ramakrishna.
He systematically erases the artificial boundary between the sacred and the secular.
He delivers a massive cognitive reframe, stating plainly, "To labor is to pray."
In the conventional Western mindset, religion is deeply compartmentalized. It's an activity confined to a church, a mosque, or a temple, perhaps practiced for an hour on a Sunday morning.
The rest of the week, the office, the factory floor, the kitchen, is viewed as secular drudgery, completely divorced from spiritual pursuit.
But if you actually apply the logic of Advaita Vedanta, if the underlying reality of every single atom and every single individual is inherently divine, then life itself, in all its mundane details, becomes the practice of religion.
The corporate office, the university study hall, the farmyard, and the bustling city street are revealed to be as fundamentally sacred as the inner sanctum of a monastery.
Karma yoga dictates that work, when performed without selfish attachment to the personal rewards or outcomes, becomes a direct path to spiritual realization.
It's not merely a call to perform philanthropic deeds, it is a fundamental shift in perception, recognizing the divine essence in the labor itself and honoring the divinity in the people you are serving through your work.
In exploring human action, the text ventures into incredibly complex and potentially controversial moral territory.
When discussing human impulses, even those we universally categorize as destructive or evil, Vivekananda makes a startling assertion. He argues that even our darkest impulses are, at their absolute core, a misguided, distorted search for freedom.
This represents a profound psychological insight into human motivation. He posits that the desire for freedom is the pulse of the universe. It breathes in the throb of every atom.
Every action a human being takes, no matter how terribly executed, is a warped expression of the soul's inherent, desperate desire to break free from limitation and experience unity.
The initial impulse toward expansion is divine, but as it filters through the dense, ignorant layers of the ego and the conditioned mind, it becomes wildly misdirected.
To elucidate the nature of good and evil, he relies on a powerful metaphor, the analogy of the unattached light.
I love this analogy.
He asks the audience to imagine a bright lamp illuminating a room. One individual sits beneath the light of that lamp and uses its illumination to carefully write out a $1,000 check to a charity that will feed starving children.
And another individual sits beneath the exact same light, utilizing the exact same illumination to meticulously forge a friend's signature on a fraudulent document.
The analogy forces us to evaluate the locus of morality. The light itself is completely neutral, an unattached observer.
It provides the necessary energy and illumination for the action to occur, but it bears zero moral culpability for the ethical nature of the action. It is neither ennobled by the charity nor tainted by the forgery.
Taking that a step further, the philosophical friction here lies in applying this to the motive power of the universe itself. Vivekananda suggests that the underlying energetic force of existence is love, or, to use a more scientific term, attraction.
It's the invisible force that binds atoms into molecules, that holds planets in their orbits around the sun, and that pulls human beings together into families and societies.
However, humanity, operating under the heavy veil of ignorance, frequently misdirects this immense power.
The thief who steals a bag of gold is technically acting on the power of love, a deep, obsessive love for the gold and the freedom he believes it will bring. But the manifestation of that love is entirely distorted.
The energy powering the saint and the criminal is the exact same unattached light. The difference lies entirely in the direction of the manifestation.
Actions we label good are those that direct this energy toward unity and selflessness. Actions we label evil are those that direct this energy toward extreme separation, selfishness, and the reinforcement of the ego.
This understanding completely reorients our approach to human passions. The goal of spiritual development is not to annihilate our emotions or suppress our desires, but to purify and redirect them.
Which seamlessly transitions into his discourse on Bhakti Yoga, the path of devotion. The texts describe the madness of love, a state where an individual is so consumed by devotion that they cease to care about personal salvation, philosophical enlightenment, or freedom from the cycle of rebirth.
They desire only to love for the sheer sake of loving.
What I found deeply resonant about his take on Bhakti is how accurately he diagnoses the root cause of our everyday emotional suffering.
He points out that human beings are born with an infinite, inexhaustible capacity for love inside us, a mighty, rushing river of emotion.
But the tragedy of human existence is what we attempt to do with that immense energy. We consistently try to pour an infinite ocean of love into finite, fragile containers.
He poignantly refers to the objects of our earthly affection as little dolls of human beings.
The critique is not a condemnation of human relationships, but an observation of displaced expectations. We place the crushing weight of our infinite need for perfection, unconditional love, and absolute security onto the shoulders of another human being.
Or we project it onto a career trajectory or a certain level of financial wealth. And because all finite things are bound by the laws of change and decay, this strategy inevitably guarantees profound suffering.
The mechanics of that suffering are straightforward. Finite things inevitably break. People let us down despite their best intentions. They change their minds, they fall ill, and ultimately they die. Fortunes evaporate. Careers end.
If you attempt to force the infinite power of your soul's love into a finite temporal container, the sheer pressure will eventually shatter the container, leaving you with a broken heart and a sense of existential betrayal.
The practice of Bhakti Yoga, therefore, demands a massive recalibration of where we aim our emotional energy. It dictates that this tremendous force of love must be directed toward the only object capable of absorbing its infinite weight without shattering. The infinite itself, the absolute, or God.
You gather up all your intense passions, all your desperate desires for unbreakable connection and permanent security, and you aim them directly at the source of all existence.
Vivekananda encourages a fiercely intimate, almost confrontational relationship with the divine. He says, if you feel the need to be furiously angry, be angry with God. Chide your beloved.
Because a mortal human will react defensively, retreat, and cause you pain, but the infinite can withstand the full brunt of your emotion.
The ultimate objective is to transfigure our possessive, carnal, and limited love into a divine, unbounded love that recognizes the infinite residing within every finite form.
We have journeyed through his triumphant arrival in Chicago, unraveled the Vedantic mechanics of the soul, examined the cosmic illusion of the universe, and explored how to pragmatically redirect our daily actions and emotional depth.
And now, the narrative in Volume 4 makes a geographical and tonal shift.
We turn to the section titled Lectures from Colombo to Almora. This chronicles Vivekananda's eventual return to India after years of touring the West.
The context is vital here. He is returning not as an unknown wandering monk, but as an international sensation. He has been validated by the Western intellectual elite. He is famous, celebrated, and deeply revered.
The natural expectation for a returning hero would be to bask in the adulation, deliver platitudes praising the inherent greatness of his homeland, and perhaps offer comforting words to a colonized populace.
Now, he does the exact opposite. He embarks on a tour from the southern tip of India to the Himalayas, delivering blistering, uncompromising tough love.
His patriotism was fierce and unquestionable, but it was absolutely devoid of blind sentimentality. He possessed a terrifyingly clear-eyed view of his country's condition.
He saw a nation paralyzed by extreme degradation, crushing poverty, rigid social stratification, and the systemic oppression of the vast majority of the Indian masses.
And in this moment of crisis, he takes a shockingly bold sociopolitical stance. In late 19th century India, the universally accepted narrative among the intelligentsia was to squarely blame the British colonial administration for all of the subcontinent's miseries.
Vivekananda refuses to take that easy exit. He forces the nation to look inward.
He addresses his audiences and says, as a Vedantist, I cannot but put that question to myself, who is responsible? And the answer he provides is brutal in its honesty.
He declares, not the English. It is we who are responsible for all our misery. He points an unwavering finger directly at the Indian aristocracy, the highest echelons of the caste system, and the nation's own ancestors.
He accuses the social elite of having trodden the common masses underfoot for centuries. He uses the evocative phrase that they had treated the working classes merely as hewers of wood and drawers of water,
systematically stripping them of their dignity until the poor had practically forgotten their own humanity. He was utterly disgusted by the hypocrisy he witnessed.
He saw individuals armed with modern, liberal education who were simultaneously utilizing crude, pseudoscientific arguments of hereditary transmission to justify the continued oppression of the lower castes.
He characterizes these justifications as demoniacal and brutal arguments, designed specifically to brutalize and tyrannize over the poor.
To completely shatter this pervasive illusion of hereditary weakness and genetic destiny, he deploys a gripping, deeply unsettling narrative he acquired during his time in the West. He tells his Indian audience the story of a young African boy.
The anecdote is stark and devastating. He recounts how this boy was the son of a tribal chief in the heart of Africa. A rival faction attacked their village, brutally murdered his parents, and in an act of profound savagery, cooked and consumed them.
The boy was slated for execution as well, but he managed a desperate escape. He traversed hundreds of miles of hostile territory, enduring unimaginable physical and psychological trauma until he finally reached the coast.
He managed to secure passage on an American vessel, eventually making his way to the United States.
This boy, completely stripped of his family, his culture, and plunged into a foreign society that was deeply entrenched in its own racial prejudices, somehow survives.
And the punchline that Vivekananda delivers to his audience is absolute dynamite.
That exact same African boy, the survivor of such profound, brutalizing trauma, was the very individual who stood up and delivered one of the most brilliant, eloquent, and sophisticated speeches at the Parliament of Religions in Chicago.
Vivekananda uses this specific, undeniable narrative to completely obliterate the idea that certain races, classes, or castes are biologically or spiritually destined to remain ignorant or subservient.
He looks at the proponents of the rigid caste system and demands, after that, what was I to think of your doctrine of heredity?
He is leveraging this story to demand radical social equality, but crucially, it is an equality grounded firmly in spiritual truth rather than merely political expediency.
He is arguing that if the core tenet of Advaita Vedanta is true, if every single biological entity contains the infinite, unchangeable, perfectly pure soul, from the simplest amoeba to the most exalted saint, then the structural hierarchy of a caste system is not just a social crime, it is a profound spiritual delusion.
There is no fundamental ontological difference between a high-born Brahmin and a street sweeper. The only variable is the environmental opportunity provided to manifest that latent inner perfection.
And he thundered against a society that deliberately withheld that opportunity from the masses. So what does this all mean for the immediate future of the nation he was addressing?
The dominant theme that permeates every lecture in this final section of Volume 4 is an uncompromising demand for strength. He notes that if there is one word repeated over and over again in the ancient Upanishads, it is Abhi, which means fearless.
He offers a deeply pragmatic analogy regarding the cure for societal and personal weakness. He explains that if a room is filled with darkness, you do not cure the darkness by constantly talking about how dark it is. You cure the darkness by introducing light.
Similarly, you do not try to wash dirt away with more dirt. You wash dirt away with clean water.
Therefore, the cure for the pervasive weakness he saw in India was not to dwell on the weakness or to adopt weakening, superstitious mysticisms that made people cower in fear of ghosts and astrological charts. The cure was to constantly remind the populace of their infinite inherent strength.
He held a deep disdain for any philosophy or religious practice that sapped the vitality of the human spirit. He demanded a religion of immense practical strength.
In framing this vision for an awakened India, he consciously redefines the archetypes of power. He points to Sita, the central female figure of the ancient epic, the Ramayana, as the supreme ideal of Indian strength.
In Western interpretations, or even superficial cultural readings, Sita's endurance might be misconstrued as passivity or submission. Vivekananda aggressively corrects this.
He presents Sita not as weak, but as the embodiment of unyielding purity, infinite patience, and an immense, quiet, unbreakable strength.
She endured profound suffering without resorting to the base level of her captors, representing a highly evolved spiritual fortitude that he believed was the true, latent heritage of the Indian nation.
The ultimate vision he casts for India's future on the global stage is entirely unique. He did not envision India rising up to become an imperial military superpower attempting to colonize other nations.
He stated clearly, the only condition of national life, of awakened and vigorous national life, is the conquest of the world by Indian thought.
He envisioned an empire of the mind and spirit. He wanted India to conquer the world not through the force of arms, but through the profound philosophy of Vedanta.
He saw the modern Western world as having achieved absolute mastery over the external material environment through brilliant scientific and organizational innovation, yet simultaneously starving internally, sitting on a ticking volcano of materialism and unrest.
Conversely, he saw India as having achieved absolute mastery over the internal spiritual world through thousands of years of rigorous introspection, yet starving physically and languishing socially.
His ultimate mission was to orchestrate a grand exchange of these two masteries for the mutual salvation of both hemispheres.
To briefly touch upon another facet of Volume 4 that beautifully encapsulates this mission, we must mention his poetry and translations. Interspersed among the dense philosophical arguments are works like The Song of the Sannyasin.
In these verses, he distills the complex mechanics of non-dualism into rhythmic, emotional cadence. He writes lines demanding the soul to strike off thy fetters, bonds that bind thee down, of shining gold or darker, baser ore.
The poetry serves as the emotional heartbeat of the intellect, proving that the realization of the infinite is not merely a dry academic exercise, but a deeply moving, liberating human experience.
We have covered a truly massive amount of intellectual and historical territory today.
We really have. We began by imagining a frog trapped in a dark, localized well, stubbornly refusing to acknowledge the existence of the boundless sea.
We traveled back to a hot September day in Chicago in 1893, standing on the stage where the ancient East formally collided with the modern West.
We scaled the dizzying, often disorienting philosophical heights of Advaita Vedanta, wrestling with the proposition that the entire universe, with all its sound and fury, is merely a temporary dream passing over the infinite, unblemished blue sky of the eternal soul.
We examined the precise mechanisms of karma and the necessity of redirecting the chaotic madness of human love toward the divine through Bhakti.
And finally, we listened to the roaring, uncompromising call for fearlessness, radical social responsibility, and the urgent necessity of recognizing the absolute divinity residing within every single human being, regardless of their station in life.
It is a sweeping journey that takes the listener from the most confined, fragmented, sectarian view of reality possible, and stretches the mind toward the most expansive, universally unified view imaginable.
But the true value of dissecting a text like the complete works of Swami Vivekananda does not lie in the memorization of historical dates or the appreciation of his poetic analogies.
The true value lies entirely in the immediate practical application of these concepts for you, the listener, in your everyday life.
Yes, how does this actually change the reality of waking up tomorrow morning?
If the core thesis of this text is fundamentally true, if the philosophy of Vedanta offers an accurate description of reality, then every single parameter of your life shifts.
It means that you are not, and have never been, a helpless victim of random circumstance.
It means you are not merely a fragile biological machine destined to decay and eventually disappear into nothingness. You are the sole architect of your own tendencies, carrying the weight of total responsibility for the life you have manufactured through your actions.
But simultaneously, you are the infinite, perfect, luminous screen upon which the complex movie of your life is currently playing.
It is a philosophy that strips away all excuses and demands absolute accountability. But in exchange, it offers the promise of absolute, unassailable freedom.
That is a remarkably heavy yet incredibly liberating paradigm to hold in your mind. Thank you so much for dedicating your time and focus to joining us on this deeply philosophical journey today.
It's been a profound exploration.
As a gentle reminder, if you enjoyed this extensive exploration of the complete works of Swami Vivekananda, Volume 4, please ensure you are subscribed to the Simplified Summary YouTube channel. Your engagement is what allows us to keep producing these detailed deep dives. Share this analysis with a friend who might need a reminder of their own infinite nature, and continue exploring the vast ocean of thought that lies just outside the well.
Before we conclude, I want to leave you with one final, lingering question to explore quietly on your own time. It builds directly upon everything we have discussed regarding the illusion of separation and the foundational reality of unity.
I'm intrigued.
The texts we examine today make a startling claim. If you truly authentically perceive the underlying unity of all things, if you realize on a cellular level that the exact same infinite soul resides in you as resides in everyone else, it becomes logically impossible to hate anyone.
Because, under the framework of Advaita Vedanta, to hate another person is literally to hate a part of your own self.
It is the ultimate metaphysical foundation for the Golden Rule. So my question to you is this. As you walk out into the complex, often chaotic world tomorrow, and you inevitably encounter someone who deeply frustrates you, someone who actively wrongs you, or someone whose worldview you fundamentally and vehemently oppose.
What would it take?
Exactly. What would it actually take in that precise heated moment of anger to mentally strip away the dense covering of their flawed actions? Look past the temporary cloud of their ignorance and genuinely think to yourself, thou art that.